Video games are awesome. They're fun, usually. They're visually stunning, usually. And they tell interesting and immersive stories, usually. They're a combination of various disciplines of art, all combined into an interactive experience unlike any other form of entertainment. They're also incredibly interesting, both with the care and genius that goes into making some of them, but also into the bigger picture of how they evolve. Much like studying the actual process of biological evolution, it's just about impossible to put your finger on the point where things change. It can only be observed over time. Evolution in an art form is similar, although not quite as nebulous, since there are certainly some milestone products that come along every so often. Context is also incredibly important. A good game today may not be a good game 10 years from now, and a good game 10 years ago may not be a good game today. This is largely thanks to the evolution in the art form, as new ways to do things are discovered, worked out, and perfected, and as the hardware behind the games gets more and more powerful all the time, the horizon of things that are possible is always being expanded. So taking a look at history in gaming, it's very difficult to get a sense of what a game was in isolation. Only in the context of its times can it be fully understood and appreciated. That's where ChronGaming comes in. ChronGaming is short for chronological gaming. It's a kind of video review series that covers every single game for a particular game console in chronological order, usually mixing some historical perspective into the reviews. It's definitely a niche area within the gaming community, mostly created by and for gaming history nerds or specific fan bases for particular platforms. Now, despite the niche status, it's actually got quite a surprisingly long history. The first Chron gamer, known as Dr. Sparkle, started their ChronTendo series all the way back in 2007 and has been running ever since. This original series was dedicated to covering each and every game for the NES or Famicom. Over the years, there have been many others, such as Kevin Bunch's Atari Archive series for the second generation of game consoles, including the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and others. There's Jeremy Parish's NES Works, which also documents the NES, but has expanded to cover basically the entire 8-bit generation of the late 1980s. There's Generation 16 by Craig Seward, covering the Sega Genesis history. There's Pandemonium, covering the entire US Sega Saturn library, and Brian Schmid, doing the same thing for the Dreamcast. And I'm sure there's even more out there that I don't even know about yet. The unspoken pattern here is nostalgia. Each of us are focusing in on an era that holds some particular magic for us, likely by being that era that first enchanted us into becoming gamers, even if these particular games or particular consoles weren't our formative experiences. The milieu of these eras is what we're both trying to recapture and more so trying to unravel, in that each of these projects is doing its part to lay down another layer of history from those who lived it to those who did not. For those of us that grew up in or lived through a certain period of time, we are the only ones that can have that particular frame of reference for what it was like to have experienced the state of mind that these games were the latest thing we had, and we had no concept of what would come next. But as the saying goes, you can't go home again. ChronGaming is simply the next best thing, and perhaps the most responsible and level-headed way of parsing out nostalgia in a productive, educational, investigatory manner. I myself am a millennial. I was born in the early 1990s and came of age in the 2000s. Thus, my formative experience with gaming largely took place during the 6th generation of consoles. I did start out with the PlayStation in the waning years towards the end of its lifespan. I thoroughly enjoyed the Dreamcast for the last year it was available in clearance bins, but for the bulk of the 2000s, I was a GameCube owner. Like many gamers growing up, Nintendo was certainly there playing the role of the responsible facilitator towards the gaming tastes so we'd grow and evolve as we grew up. And like many gamers that disproportionately had the Nintendo systems as kids, it holds that special hit of nostalgia. If you're a millennial of similar vintage, even if you did not have a GameCube, it probably has a little nostalgia for you, even just from the secondhand experience with some of its games, or just some of the indelible charm that Nintendo's able to put into its creations. This isn't to take anything away from the contemporaries. I did, by the end of the 6th generation era, actually own all 4 consoles, and I have fond memories with each, as I'm certain many of you do as well. Nintendo just seems to keep a little bit more of that spark for people, and for myself as well. So that's at least where I will be starting. And believe me, I'm doing everything in my power to resist just doing a Chron series for the entire 6th generation, but I want to do something that's doable. And that's where I will identify the main pitfall of ChronGaming and propose my heretical point of view. No ChronGaming series has ever completed its task, despite years and years of effort. When a very popular system like the NES, PlayStation, or Wii can have over 1,000 titles published for them, it's almost an impossible task from the start. The GameCube alone has over 500 titles published for it in the North American market. And this is where I would like to evolve the format a little bit, and in the process, maybe improve the taxonomy of games also. With ChronCube, I will not be covering every single GameCube game ever made, even just North American ones. I will be trying, and I emphasize trying, to separate the chaff from the wheat so that the time and effort can be better focused on covering titles with more historical or nostalgic interest. What I'm really saying is that I plan to skip just about every sports game. This is something that certainly becomes more and more of a problem as you go forward in the gaming timeline, and the 6th generation had an overabundance of sports games. So I will largely be writing off any video game adaptation of baseball, hockey, football, soccer, boxing, bowling, volleyball, and tennis. But I will expand this definition even further to include extreme sports like skateboarding, surfing, motorbiking, off-road racing, drag racing, and car racing in general. The other thing in abundance during the 6th generation was cheaply produced games based on movie or television licenses. These I'm going to approach on a case-by-case basis. Some of them certainly are genuinely good games and deserve a look. Some of them don't. This is where discretion gets tricky, since I'm playing fast and loose without any hard rules. I'll try to lay some out. Like, for example, I plan on covering every title that Nintendo published, since they are the first-party company in this situation. This will even include a sports game or two, or a licensed game that I might not cover otherwise. And I'll certainly cover a few launch titles that wouldn't otherwise make my cut, due to their position as the premier titles for the system. But I do not intend to be a stone wall ignoring something worth attention, so I will also upload a Google document of the entire list of GameCube games that I'm working with in their chronological order, and I will identify the games I plan to cover and the ones I don't, and leave it totally open for viewers to leave their comments or opinions if you think I'm missing something that deserves a look. After all, one of the benefits of ChronGaming is that when a library is covered in its entirety, we're forced to discover every hidden gem. Again, the problem is that you have to turn over so many stones to find them, it's almost not worth it. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to be going through the GameCube's library because I'm a nostalgic millennial who grew up with it, and I like talking about video games, compiling history, and video editing. If you're a nostalgic millennial gamer, you'll probably also enjoy it as well. If you're not, well, I hope it's still enjoyable regardless. Thanks for watching.